Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another thing where I talk about things. So today, I would like to talk about casualization in games. Last video I did was about Overwatch, and it got so many dislikes, I feel like I may as well have talked politics. Probably would have gotten more positive, more thumbs up from politics. But I don't actually want to talk about casualization specifically with relation to Overwatch. Just I was thinking about the whole thing and about Blizzard's history and why I have developed this dislike for them as a company. And one thing that they've done with a lot of their IP is they've tried to casualize everything. Like, they've taken a lot of their genres and they've made everything a little bit lighter, more friendly, and they're trying to expand their audience. It's not just Blizzard, Activision. It's basically like every game company. They're trying to be as casual and as friendly as possible to get as many people playing their games as possible. And you hear some gamers will rant about this. They absolutely hate it. But it's got kind of ups and downs. It's sort of an interesting phenomenon. Because you get things like, for example, Halo, which Halo was massively popular, a ton of people loved it. It actually started a ton of trends in the first-person shooter market that hadn't been there before. Some of them actually got kind of annoying, like people got a little bit sick of the fact that you could just recharge shields. That was not a thing that used to happen. Back in the day, it used to be that if you played a shooter, you had to run around and you had to look for health kits. Like, there'd be health kits that were lying on the ground, and so if you had a boss fight coming up, you'd see a bunch of health kits to get you up to full health, and you would know, like, oh goodness, there's something big coming up. So game developers, when they were designing their levels with like this health kit system, they would have to set out health kits and try to plan so that they would do enough damage to the player. And then here's your health kit, and you get to recover from the damage that's done, so that like an average, medium-level player could get through the whole game and not run out of health. The trouble with that is that it's very difficult to predict exactly how well people are going to play, and you don't really know, what's the bell curve. Like, people are going to play up on certain ranges. Like, the really good players are not going to need the health kits at all. In fact, they may make a challenge to get through the whole game and never pick up health. And the really bad players may just be dying left and right. They don't even really get to the first health kit. They just get annihilated, and they constantly feel stressed and like they're on sort of a low health situation. There are still games that kind of hung on to the health kit system or sort of variants of it. For example, I think like Resident Evil 4, if I'm remembering correctly, had a system where you could like eat health plants or something like that. You would pick up these sort of health items and you can eat them when you needed them. So you saved them, you stored them. And then this way, the game designers could sort of just give you things, and since it was in your inventory, they knew that, oh well, we gave them a health kit here, so it's up to them to use it or save it or whatever. They don't have to plan quite as severely. But that recharging health thing, though, that became incredibly like a ton of developers loved it and a ton of players loved it for two reasons. The players loved it, first of all, because it made it way easier to get through a lot of these games. And I'll get more into shooters, but shooters actually used to be not just shooters. They were also freaking rat mazes. Like, they were ridiculous. I remember playing some games back in the day that I never beat. Not because it was too hard and I didn't have good enough twitch reflexes, but because I would get lost in the mazes that the developers would set up and not be able to find my way out of the place. But they've kind of quit doing the rat maze thing. But it made it easier to get through fights. Like, you could just sit down, you'd fire off a few shots, you'd get hit, and then you'd hunker down behind cover and wait for your health to come back up. So you never really get slowed down. You never have to restart a level or anything like that. You just, as long as you didn't get totally killed, you could just survive indefinitely. And who knows, even punch a tank to death if you really had to. In fact, I have a story when playing Halo 3. It turns out that if your teammate dies, if you're playing with a friend and he dies, then he will respawn if you're still alive, like over a certain length of time. So at one point we were supposed to be driving like an ATV through a valley or something like that, and our ATV got blown up. And so we were just stuck like behind a rock while the AI was trying to look for us, but for some reason it wasn't programmed to go and look behind this rock. So this tank kept driving back and forth trying to find us, and we would continually pop out and take pot shots at it with the rifle. The tank would turn around and blow us up, and then we would have whoever died like respawn, and we just went back and forth like this in this stupid war of attrition and death with this tank until finally we'd shot a tank to death with the rifles, because every time you respawned it gave you more ammo for the rifles. Now this is probably, you could say, it's very poor gameplay. Like, it's not really the way the game was intended to be played, but it was very amusing for us and we had a good time playing it. And in fact, you find that a lot of people had a good time doing that kind of thing. As much as some people complained about that cover deal, the fact that you could stay in the action and just keep going and going and going was kind of an advantage. It kept things moving and it was fun. And it was a casualization but it was something that made the games fun, more enjoyable. The trouble is that it became oversaturated. Everybody started doing it, and it got to where, you know, you would play a shooter and it would be weird to not have your health just automatically recover. Plenty of games still kind of do that, but not all of them do, of course. Yes, but anyway, though, back in the day, though, the other thing that this did that was nice is that it allowed game developers also to not have to worry about their level design quite so much. Is it made it to where they could just throw you down a hallway of enemies, and they wouldn't have to care about whether or not there was a side door with a med kit or any way of healing yourself. And this has actually gotten to be less relevant, because as games get bigger and bigger, you're finding that they're actually becoming smaller and smaller as they release new games, and this isn't always the case. But I remember, like, for example, I used to play this series called Ace Combat, and when I talk about the kind of games that I play, like, I don't know, it might become more apparent why I dislike Blizzard so much for casualizing all their old games. But like not Ace Combat, excuse me, Armored Core. Armored Core is a series produced by From Software, which some of you guys are familiar with. From Software, they're the same company that produced Dark Souls. And Armored Core was this game that was about robots. And you built this giant robot, and then you ran around and you shot other giant robots. It's an insanely challenging game, like, man, I don't recommend it for very many people. I only knew one friend who really was able to get into it. I introduced it to a bunch of people. Only one friend ever really picked it up and played it at all. I was the only person I knew who got, like, really good at it. But just very difficult game. Like, you spent a lot of time in the garage tweaking and designing your robot. And I remember how impressed my friend was the first time I showed up at his house with my memory card. And I had a robot in the garage that was rated S rank according to the game systems. Like, S rank was the highest rank you could go. And he had not yet figured out how to make an S rank robot. There were probably guides online to do it, but I just made my own custom S rank robot. And at first I made one. And then I kept going, and that was like a heavy robot, and so that was like, oh, well, okay, it's a tank, so it's got like all this armor and everything like that. And then I figured out how to do it with a lightweight robot. And so I was able to start making these sort of S-rank robots, and then it just got to be like, every time I would show up, it would just be like, man, like, you are designing, in the first place, you are designing vehicles that are a class above what I'm playing in. And then aside from that, you've got the twitch reflexes and everything else. So there were these kind of like magnitudes where the better you got at the game, you got better in more complex ways. And because there was so much complexity, you know, you got further and further. There was this huge gap between people who were not quite so good and people who were very, very good. Because you would be very, very good at all the twitch reflexes and all the controls and everything else, and awareness, situational awareness, but then you'd also be good at designing your robot and doing all these other things. But as far as games getting smaller, though, when Armored Core moved on to the PS3, or the PS4, I believe it was. I think it was the PS4. I know, PS4 or PS3, whatever it was. When they moved on to the next generation, it was the PS3, that's what it was. It was the PS3. When they moved on to the PS3, they actually didn't have the budget, it appeared, to make the game really all that varied anymore. So you wound up in, like, the desert and the ocean and, like, the Arctic tundra. Like, just basically, like, flat rolling plains. Like, every single thing was a flat rolling plain. This game didn't casualize, but it was one of those really glaring examples of, like, oh man, like, we've got this much larger graphical demand. Like, we need to put in so much more work and so much more budget into making the game look attractive and polished. And oh god, all we can afford is a desert. So a lot of games have gotten to where, like, back in the day, when you used to play a game, like, for example, Dark Forces was the thing that I owned. Dark Forces was basically 2D, made to look like it was 3D, but you would get these large, like, sprawling levels with, like, hidden stuff in there. Man, it would just go on and on and on. There would be these massive mazes, like, intricately planned out, and you would get lost. Like, you wouldn't know where to go. You would just get turned around. You wouldn't know where to go. Some places were that big. Jedi Knight, the sequel to that, was also another one that I owned. And that was the same thing. I actually never beat Jedi Knight without cheating all the way through. I did try once when I got to be a little bit older, when I got into my 20s, but never really got all the way through because it was just a much larger game, and you had to run around all over the place flipping switches because there were so many different little nooks and crannies to look into. I think that probably had I had enough patience, I could have gotten through it, but it was a mix of you had to run around looking for different places, and every now and then you might run into the wrong room, and there would be enemies everywhere, and they would just gun you down and they would kill you. And because of the situation in those games where you had the med kit you had to pick up, if you screwed up, if you didn't know where the enemies were and you were not quick on the trigger, then if you screwed up too many times, you just wind up low on health, and you might not be able to progress through the game effectively anymore. So those games also became about rote memorization as well as everything else, because you had to know where everything was, where all the enemies are. You had to be quick on the trigger to kill them all, and you know, so it was kind of a mix of a lot of different things to be good at the game and to get through it effectively. But to be fair though, looking back, that while I have nostalgia for it, did kind of suck, because there were a lot of games that you had to really spend a lot of time getting to know, or you had to look up a lot of information about to be able to play it. And games like Armored Core, for example, in this day and age, I actually can't play Armored Core anymore. Like, I really like that game. I really like the whole idea behind it. I like all the customization. But honestly, like, I don't really have time to sit down and devote like hours into building a robot and then learning how to use the robot and then like using the robot, practicing, and then going to play with a friend. More often now, I just have like a couple hours that I can sit down and I can play some games while I'm, you know, waiting for dinner to cook or whatever the case. I am an adult. This is part of being an adult, I suppose. Is you know, I mean, like you have those free days, but the thing about those games, the really demanding non-casual games, is that you have to be able to spend a lot of time into getting good at them. I do make an exception for RTS games, though, and so RTS games, I've been a big RTS junkie for a really long time, and StarCraft 2 was one of the first big games that really disappointed me about Blizzard, and that was because they tried to casualize the thing. And RTS games, unlike shooters, RTS games have not gotten more casual in a way that has made them more fun. First-person shooter games, you know, they got things like regenerating health, you know, they became a little bit more pretty. I mean, it's like easier to see enemies now. There's some pros and there's some cons. Like, you can kind of argue for and against certain things in the first-person shooter games. And there's such a variety out there. You know, there's really not too much that you can begrudge of the whole system. But RTS games are very niche. They're not played by a lot of people. They were never really a very casual genre to begin with. Very unforgiving. If you screw around in those, if you don't know how to play an RTS, you'll get dominated by people that do. But Blizzard wanted to kind of expand that game and make it more accessible to people. So what they kind of went for was, rather than having like a core infantry unit and focusing on strategy and map control and things like that, you got more into a hard counter system where you needed to build a particular unit to counter another particular unit. And there are still certain strategies. Well, they're not really strategies anymore. What they do in StarCraft 2 is more like tactics, where if you build a certain number of units by X time, you will find that the enemy may not be able to build enough of the hard counter to slow you down. So if you can get in there with enough of X unit at Y time, then you go ahead and you wipe out the enemy. So there's a lot of tactics that work in StarCraft 2, but there are very few strategies unless you're at the lower levels or the highest levels. And this was what was weird, is I got into StarCraft 2, and you'll find this a lot when you try to casualize games that are inherently supposed to be complicated, is that they become very easy to exploit if you try to casualize them. And StarCraft 2 is one of these examples. Some people tell me that they found that StarCraft 2 was a really fun game. In fact, I had a friend who was telling me that exact same thing. I was complaining to him, like, when I first got started, I was like, man, like, this is so broken, like, this game is so broken, I'm so frustrated with Blizzard, the way that they've set this up. Like, you have these bunkers, they used to have these things, you could set down these bunkers, right, and your units could get inside the bunkers, and as long as they were inside the bunkers, the enemy would have to shoot the bunker and destroy the bunker before they could kill the guys inside. But then what they did is they added this reclaim bunker ability, where you could just like reclaim the bunker, and that would give you the entire resource worth of the bunker back. So you would set the bunker down, the bunker would nearly get destroyed, the enemy would just reclaim the bunker, get all the resources back, and then build another bunker. And so you had games where like the enemy was showing up and pulling this kind of like cheese on you. And the higher up you got in the leagues, the more standard it was to play against that cheese, because it was so effective, and no good player would ever, in their right mind, not use the most effective strategies. So my friend was in the much lower levels of the game, and I remember him just like telling me like, yeah, it's a lot of fun. Like, I recently won, like, I built nothing but tanks, nothing but siege tanks, and I didn't even put them in siege mode. It was really funny. It was really funny. It was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun that game. Like, he almost got me, but I got away with it. And it's like, oh, that's great, man. Like, boy, that would be a lot of fun. Except for one thing that's weird about the way that Blizzard has also approached casualized games, and one thing that people might find very frustrating as they get into Overwatch because they're using a similar system, is that Blizzard tries to match you up based on your skill level. They don't let you go into the pubs and just stomp people who are below your ability. They're going to try to get you with other players who are at your same skill level. This means that at all times, like if you are the type of person who is not very good at games, you're probably going to have fun in the game. So like my friend, for example, he had fun playing StarCraft 2 because he was not a very good player, and so Blizzard was always trying to match him up with other players who were kind of lousy at the game, and they would surprise each other. Like they would build in really unorthodox ways, they would do things that would normally get, they were super punishable behaviors. Like if he played against me, it would be the type of thing, would be like, oh man, I've already won the game. Like in the first 5 minutes, I've already won. And so he would play 1v1 versus me a couple times, and then just get trounced every single time, and then he would start saying, like, let's not do that anymore, let's do versus computer. And so, like, at that lower level, you can kind of have fun. So if you're really bad at the game, Blizzard will throw you against other people who are also really bad at the game, and you can have a good time. And that's sort of nice for those people at the lower rungs. But as you start to get better at the game, if you play it frequently, and you're having a lot of time, what they will do is they'll gradually force you upward into the point where people grasp the fundamental mechanics better and better, and you're going to find that people are going to start to cheese you more and more. You're just going to get you're going to find these really cheesy, really overpowered strategies, and if the game is very casual, the more casual the game is, the more you're going to find these cheesy strategies. But people are just going to use these really cheesy tricks and tactics on you because they're the most effective way to win, and it's how these guys get better and move up the ladder. So the better you get at the game, the more you're going to run into that. And I got into that with StarCraft 2. Was I kept getting better and better at the game, and then I started to get into the section of the game where everybody was using the most exploitative crap possible. And because the game was much more casual, the exploitative crap was way harder to counter because the mechanics were simpler. Another example of a strategy game that went more casual, and in my opinion, suffered for it in some regards, was Civ 5. And I've talked about Civ 5 before, and Civ 5 is kind of, it's not all bad. Like, after fully understanding the game, like, I don't absolutely despise it, but it lost a lot of technical bulk. And it gained the hex system. Like it took away the unit stacks, the death stacks that they used to have in Civ 4. The way that combat used to work in Civ 4 is you would build an army and they would all occupy a single square, and you would just take this entire stack of like 100 troops and you would go and you just throw them at a city. And that was how every battle went. And it was kind of a really crappy way to conduct battles because whoever had the biggest stack would win the battles, and it made it to where like units that could damage the whole stack at once were way more valuable than units that could just attack individually. So it wasn't really a very good mechanic. The battle stuff for Civ 4 was kind of poor. But virtually everything else about Civ 4 was more complicated, took a lot more time to learn, and therefore rewarded a player who knew how to build things and get better. And so it kind of comes back to like this Armored Core thing where you kind of look at the game and there are all these different aspects to Civ 4 that you have to understand. And so maybe you're good at understanding like the economy or whatever, or you know how to manage the civs, or you know how to do that. And everything that you get good at, it all plays together and makes you a better overall player. So the difference between a very good player and a player who's not so good is very high. What Civ 5 did is they casualized, and so they brought everything closer together. So they took the amount of understanding you needed to play the game in the first place, and they raised it. They raised the skill floor, as it was, and then they took the knowledge that it took to be good at the game, like they lowered the skill ceiling. So good players and weaker players got a lot closer together, and the game focused a whole lot more on population growth. Is instead of working on like expanding rapidly and managing your army while not going bankrupt and like working with religion and diplomacy, the game became really more about just building the most populous city. And some people disagree with me, but only to a minor extent, because if you really sit down and you do the math, the way that the game works now, the way that Civ 5 works now, is that objectively what you want to do is have the fewest number of cities with the greatest amount of population, and you will therefore produce the most amount of science and the most amount of production, and that's just how you maximize in Civ 5. There are a certain number of very meaningful exceptions, but the point is though, is that they casualized that game And they made it to where it's easier to understand, but at the same time a lot easier to exploit. So once I figured out that, you know, this population, once I figured out that population is really the core thing that you're looking to get, it became just very, very simple to get to the top of the scoreboard when playing with everybody else. It just got to be like, oh yeah, no, I'll just do this, and like I had rules for whenever I expanded a city, and as long as I followed those simple rules, which were not very complex, and just stayed on one particular tech path, didn't deviate from this tech path, I would find myself consistently winning virtually every game, to the point where I probably should have just started bumping up my difficulty level so that I would have been slower as a consequence of just being punished. You know, it would have been a handicap, but it would have allowed everyone else to catch up to me while not playing with this optimal strategy. But Civ 4 though, like you really couldn't, if you had a bad spot in Civ 4, you were in much worse shape, or it would alter your gameplay far more than with Civ 5. Civ 5, you will lose from the outset if you're in a bad spot, but that's only because all the competitive players are following an optimal strategy and they know what they're doing. So, yeah, you find that casualization within the strategy genre or the real-time strategy genre, you know, turn-based, real-time, either way, what you tend to find is that it makes the games easier to exploit, and it makes the games, although more accessible to people. Like for example, we found that a couple of people, like you couldn't persuade. Some guys had girlfriends who they couldn't get into Civ 4, but they could get them into Civ 5 because Civ 5 was a lot easier to pick up. You know, stuff like that. It made the games more accessible. It made the audience broader. But it's kind of a weird balancing act where it's good to bring in more people. Like, you want more people playing those games. You want a bigger audience. You want to be able to just go online anytime, find a lobby, join a game. But you don't want them so casual that they become boring to the people who are actually good at games. You know, like you don't want every single game to be, I don't know, like a mobile app. You know, like mobile games are fun for a little while. Like not every game needs to be Angry Birds. And this is kind of the thing. This is what's weird about this sort of deal. But the strategy genre, though, you find it's not a lot of people go into it. They don't make phenomenal sales, and some people worry that the RTS genre is dying because they can't casualize it. Like game budgets are getting bigger and bigger, and even with the RTS genre, madly enough, you know, it's insanity. But people expect the RTS genre to also get graphically better and look prettier and get bigger and expand because that's what all the other games have done. But I don't know. It's weird because those games just don't. They have to be mechanically complex. They have to be sort of inaccessible because that's sort of the nature of strategy. It's like if you took I don't know. Let's say like chess is actually sort of a tactical game. People say that chess is a solved game. Like a computer can actually beat people at chess. They know how to predict this. But let's suppose you took chess and you said like, all right, I want more people playing chess. Let's remove like half the pieces. Let's remove all the pieces in the back and just have it be pawns. Like the game would be stupid. Like there would be no point. It would just be like, oh well, we only play with pawns. And the objective is to get to the other side of the board, I guess, and to make a queen or something like that. But you would find that there would be just the same strategies that would evolve over and over and over again. Because when you only have pawns to work with, then you find that like the most important thing would suddenly be whichever player went first. Because you'd be inclined to always move virtually the same way every single game. There might be a little bit more complexity, like you might find that, oh, maybe if I only move one space instead of two at the outset, then it makes a slightly different outcome. But chess with only pawns would be much easier to master, and more people could get into it, but it would be far easier to exploit, and someone who knew their way around the game would always just say like, well, okay, I'll go first, and I'll move in this particular fashion, and based on the way that this game usually plays out, I've already won, like I've moved. So strategy games, they don't do so well with casualization. They need a certain amount of complexity to be games, to be good games, and they just don't casualize well. Other genres, most people don't really think about as you know, casual or not. Like racing games, for example, is one of those things. Like racing games have never been complex. Racing games have always been very casual. No one's really had a hard time with racing games. RPGs, same deal, you know, fairly casual. The objective is the story. You get to the end of the story. Role-playing games, so on and so forth. It's mostly just the shooters that people get upset about. And shooters are a weird one because they didn't, like I say, they didn't used to be so straightforward. They used to be more about mazes and solving puzzles and things like that. In fact, Soul Reaver, the old platform adventure type games, those have all but vanished, it feels like. They don't really make those puzzles anymore. I think because designing all those assets and planning out all those puzzles in 3 dimensions is incredibly difficult to do. I mean, like, the Legacy of Kain series was, like, they were constantly running out of time, constantly, you know, not making their marks. Probably because it was a little too ambitious to be making complex puzzles in 3D, like, with a bunch of new art assets all the time. And in fact, it's why Defiance has you running through the exact same areas over and over again, basically, because each of the temples are just sort of like, these are the same art assets. They're just reusing art assets a lot and trying to save time and money that way so they can get you through the game, and the game will end. But yeah, but first-person shooters, they used to be more like that. They used to be more like Soul Reaver or Defiance, for examples, on our actual channel, where you would be solving puzzles and you'd be navigating around. And they just don't do that anymore. They really don't, for budget reasons, and also because it makes the games harder to play. Like, you have to be more committed to them. And a part of me is sad that they don't do that, but a part of me also doesn't really want to play another one of those games. So I sort of forgive the world for phasing them out gradually. The only other thing I can think of, I suppose, that would be where you go from, like, very hardcore to very casual, is it used to be that video games were designed with the intent that they would be in the arcade. And so you would have games like, one of the most notorious, of course, is Battletoads, where you would go down to the arcade and you would just have this basically unwinnable game, and it was meant to steal quarters from you. So you would be able to play, like, the first 2 levels, no problem. Then you get to the 3rd level, and they would have this tunnel that you had to drive through, and it was impossible. But it was also really heart-pumping. Like, Battletoads was funny. Like, I really liked Battletoads, even though I was one of the people who could never get past that tunnel part of the level. But, you know, you get that for the home console, and they didn't change it or anything like that. It was still designed to eat quarters, even though you couldn't put quarters in the game. You had limited continues. Like, the game would just make you, like, start over from the beginning. It would just be like, oh, you ran out of continues. Like, too bad, you lose. And, yeah, you know. But it was still, that was like heart-pumping trying to get through that stupid maze, because you could get so far into it. And so Battletoads is one of those, it's famous because it was fun, and it's still punished. But a lot of those games were punishing, and they were not fun. And so again, you kind of look at that, like, Battletoads is this insanely rare exception. And games got away from punishing you like that because, 1, they're not trying to eat your quarters anymore, and because 2, you know, nobody beat Battletoads, and those games were also awful. It was kind of a poor practice. It wasn't really a very smart practice. It mostly just frustrated people and made them not want to play your games anymore. So they got away from that. Kind of an amusing little bit of history about games. In fact, there's still some places, like, I know of at least 2 places, I think now, unless one of them closed down, where you can go down and you can play the old arcade games. Like, basically, you get tokens, you know, you buy a beer, you get a few tokens. Tokens are, like, super cheap at these places because they make most of their income on like, selling beer or whatever. And you can play Contra. And you can experience what it was like back in the day when games were not casual, when you would just, like, be shot by a single bullet and then you would die, and you have to put in another quarter. You have to put in another coin, another token in this case. Tokens are cheap, though. Tokens are cheap at those places. If the tokens are cheap, it's fine. But yeah, only good for nostalgia, not really good for actually playing. The only reason I think you would ever want to play games like that is if you had a Game Genie and you could just have an infinite number of lives or continues. Then you could just keep going. You could get to the end of stuff and you would see what was happening. But, yeah. I don't know. Casualization of games. People are telling me not to judge Overwatch. They're very hard on me because they're like, oh, Greg, clearly you didn't see the ultimates and everything else. I don't know. I've been watching the gameplay for it. I've been seeing all the advertisements for it. The people telling me that there are no advertisements for it. Clearly, you guys are not, like, you don't have cable, and you're not you're using ad blocker or something like that, because they're all over. They've been all over. Like I said, I go down to the gym and I see them on the television. So they've definitely been advertising Overwatch. Some people are man, like, one person was like, oh man, like, Greg, you don't know anything what you're talking about. It's gonna be great. The game's gonna be free to play. The game's gonna be da-da-da. And then I was like, wait, hold up. Like, the game's not free to play. And then he was like, no, it's absolutely free to play. Like, it's gonna be free to play. That would be crazy if they charged for it. It's like TF2. And I was like, no, it's $40. That's like bare minimum on the PC. If you're gonna play on the console, it's gonna be $60 or something like that. So yeah, they're charging for it. That's the thing that gets me, is that if the game were totally free, then yeah, whatever. But they're releasing the game, and it's going to be between $40 and $60, depending on whether you play it on the console or on the PC. And they're gonna snag just a ton of money. Like I know that people are gonna go and they're gonna play it, and everyone's like, no, the beta is great. But I also know how that is when you get like a new game, and eventually like the shine kind of wears off. Like I said, you're gonna if it's possible, if Overwatch has cheese in it, if they have some sneaky little strategies that are gonna annoy everybody, I guarantee you people are gonna figure them out and they're gonna start using them. And that'll be a thing that you'll just have to deal with if you climb the ladder. And if you stay in the lower rungs, then you won't have to see it nearly as much. But I don't know. Like I say, like Blizzard took a bunch of genres that were not good for casualization, and then they tried to casualize them, and to make up for it, they just made them very pretty, made them very flashy. And that is the other thing though that you're seeing in gaming a lot, is that you get what they call them bowl shots, which is where they take a screenshot from a game, and they just pretty it up in Photoshop. They make it look way more attractive, way more sexy than the game ever could be. And it's all a marketing trick. They add these flashy things, these marketable things, like they want the cutscenes. It's not just Blizzard that's doing it. It's a lot of different companies that are just trying to make their games marketable, trying to make them casual. They want as big of an audience as they can get. They will lie to you. They will lie, cheat, and steal to get you to buy the games. And, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, like, it's one thing, like, yeah, the beta was open for a while. I've been watching gameplay. Like, people are like, no, you don't understand. There's all kinds of strategy behind the ultimates. But talking about casualization, one thing that I think, and you could debate this, but one thing I think, though, is that when you have a move that requires your opponent to be aware rather than you necessarily being aware, it's kind of, I don't know, it takes the skill out of your hands to a certain degree. Like, obviously what you want to do with those ultimates in those games, like for example, like they have McCree, and I know that McCree is like one of the most visible ultimates that you can see in that game. Like, everybody hears him shriek everyone hears him shriek his catchphrase, and then he like lights up and everybody can shoot him to death. The objective is to get a place where you can see the most people, and yet you can still get away, and you minimize the amount of punishment you get for failing the ultimate if you fail it. That's the skill that you get into, and they call that positioning. But essentially that's the skill, is you're just trying to get to a spot where you're not going to get punished for using your ultimate. And the fact is, though, is that once you get into that spot, you really just rely on the enemy team to be aware, to not get killed by your ultimate. And so I've been seeing like lots of WebMs of people who are just, they find a good position, and they get in a spot, and the enemy team is doing something, and they just get wiped. And I don't know, I just, not a real big fan of that. Like, I don't find that to be a particularly, like, it's a very flashy game mechanic. I know that that's not a thing that happens, like, every single game. But the fact that it can happen, I mean, the fact that, like, just imagine that you're doing that and some kid, pulls his high noon shtick, and maybe nobody sees him, or maybe you're tied up with something else. There's somebody right in front of you, and then boom, high noon, everybody dies. There was one freak occurrence that I saw a WebM of that was kind of amusing, where somebody pulled the high noon ultimate, and somebody threw a bomb underneath him to try and kill him, and the bomb popped McCree up in the air, so he was able to see the entire map, and he team wiped everybody from up in the air because somebody tried to kill him. So you get those just weird, like, yeah, the ultimate, like, I don't know, yeah, it just kills everyone on screen. Like, yeah, it won't do it every time, but sometimes it'll just kill everyone on screen. Like, you never know, freak occurrence. It's like people complain about random criticals in Team Fortress 2, and then like you can't, like, how do you turn around and be like, yeah, I don't know, like ultimates will be fine. No, they're gonna be worse than criticals. I think they're gonna be worse than random crits. Like, random crits are like stupid sometimes, but I don't know. It's not that big of a deal. It's not that big of a deal, really, except for how much it costs to get the game. That's the only thing. Like TF2, I think is I actually think that TF2 is a solid casual game. Like, I play TF2 casually, and I can stomp the pubs casually. I played with a guy who actually is in the competitive scene, and can do mediocre. Like around his kind of sphere. Like, maybe if I really cared, I could get into the competitive scene of TF2 and be a mediocre competitive player. But as far as I'm concerned, it's it's a game that you log into, you play it for a while, you have a good time, you log out. It's not a game that, like, I don't know, like those types of things. Like, I just imagine, like, yeah, slap down like $40 to $60, and it's like, nah. There's so much other, like, free stuff that's at least as cool as this. Like, I don't know. I just think the marketing is really, it's just, man, like stars in people's eyes. Poof, Stardust. Like, Tinkerbell flew by and just told everyone, like, yeah, Overwatch is gonna be the next big thing. It's gonna be game of the year. Everybody's gonna love it. I just know it. But then in like I say, like a year or two, I'm sure people will still be playing it. Like, people are still playing StarCraft 2. People are still playing Diablo 3. In spite of what flops they are. Like, there are some people who are never going to leave World of Warcraft. Like, they'll complain about it endlessly, but they're never going to leave it. You know, whatever. The games will still be around. But, you know, like I say, I still strongly suspect, like, flash in the pan, Stardust in the eyes. You know, I've kind of, like, I've seen it before. I'm like, yeah. I mean, even the greats kind of passed over in a couple, like, not even like the greatest games that we've had really stay around forever. You can still love them in the past, but I don't know. Part of I suppose, like I say, I suppose it comes with the territory of, like, I don't know, saying to yourself, like, I've only got like a precious hour to do a thing. Like, I've only got a precious hour of free time. What do I spend it on? Not on anything produced by a company that I no longer trust, that's for sure. But, yes, apologies to those who are already fans of Overwatch, in spite of the fact that it's only been, like, available to play for a little while. I don't know, I don't like the art design either. I have a grudge. I have a grudge for Blizzard. So I have a bias. I will freely admit I just don't like the company. Don't like the company anymore. But, yeah. All the same, even if I don't like Overwatch, there's going to be new stuff coming out, of course. There's always new things coming out every year. It's a booming industry. We'll see more things, innovative ideas, interesting ideas. Who knows, maybe somebody will take this kind of thing with the abilities that Blizzard is doing, and they'll make it tighter and more kind of, I don't know, how can I say, like, they'll just make it, instead of having, like, so many heroes at once, they'll just get a couple of, like, really core, like, tight units, and then they'll have, like, a really brilliant art design, and then, who knows, I don't know, it's weird, it's just, entertainment. People get very into entertainment, like movies, books, things like that. People would be defensive of it. I would defend Terry Pratchett if you ask me to. Yeah, so, anyway, though, you guys, I suppose that'll be it. So thanks for watching me, everybody. I will catch you all next time.